Okay, cool. We're super excited to talk to you guys today about our project. So I'm Shelby, and you guys know Guru. This has really been a really awesome experience this semester working with the Google Codesign Marketplace project, and we're definitely super excited to get right into that. So a little bit of background. What is Codesign? So it's a web component-based prototyping tool. Basically, it's made to bridge the gap between design and engineering, primarily used by UX engineers and interaction designers, and this is an internal tool at Google. Once you're in the app, what is the marketplace? So right now there's like 3 places that kind of, resemble a marketplace. You have the project template marketplace, the component marketplace, and then the asset gallery. And so these are places where people can go discover assets, publish, and like share these things. So looking into the future at how it's expanding, so you guys kind of just heard a little bit about the current system. In the future, there's going to be more assets involved in like publishing and in the marketplace in general, and also increased functionality. And this is kind of like where our project prompt stems from, an increase of design users as well as UX engineers. So once we had that, design prompt, this was kind of our process. So we started off with research, focusing on background research to understand the problem space, user research to get an idea of who our users are, what they value. We then took those findings and led into ideation, which started off with a really cool design sprint where we worked on journey mapping, job stories, design implications, just the whole gambit. And then for the next phase, we took those big concepts that we had developed during the design sprint, moved into the design phase, worked on wireframes and mockups, and then from there we made the prototypes and evaluated them, which we'll get into all of this as we go through the presentation.
Cool. So yeah, let's jump into the background research. And we started off with a comparative analysis, looking at direct comparators like Figma, Framer, Sketch, and Adobe XD, and indirect comparators like Webflow and Unity. And with the next slide, the main goals for that was to understand how other design tools support the organization and publishing resources. And we wanted to learn about the different marketplace solutions offered by these different tools. So in the next slide, from these, we kind of mapped out certain flows in Figma to understand the steps involved in finding components, publishing components, and updating components. And in the next slide, we looked at publishing, and we noticed major differences in user-submitted metadata and information needed for publishing components across Figma and Framer. And the next slide, we looked at the different types of cards and UI elements in each of these tools to understand what information gets surfaced when a user searches for a design asset. And following that, we went to a current state analysis or a current state audit. And we performed a system audit of existing Google products to understand the patterns for resource discovery and to possibly incorporate these patterns within Codesign. So in the next slide, we have 2 major patterns that we looked at: categorization of information, about how information is arranged and grouped, and search, filtering search predictions and search states. And following these 2, we started off with user research. And we conducted interviews and contextual inquiries. We conducted 14 interviews in total. 8 of them were with Google designers and UX researchers, and 6 of them were with product and design system designers at other companies. And our primary goal was to understand the workflow of both Google and non-Google designers, what design tools they use, how they collaborate with engineering and PM. And for the Google interviews, we transitioned into a more contextual inquiry to understand how people use Codesign and the marketplace. For the non-Google interviews, we wanted to understand how other companies create and maintain design systems and how they manage component updates and the lifecycle. So from these, we came up with an affinity nodes and then grouped these nodes to make an affinity map. And we came up with 4 high-level themes under 4 different product areas or use case: Codesign General, Codesign Marketplace, Component Publishing, and Version Control. So after we did this, we exported these research insights to a spreadsheet and came up with design implications. So looking at these insights, we covered these earlier in our midpoint review, but we could go through these a little bit faster. So for general Codesign findings, we noticed there's a huge learning curve for new users, and users mentioned that it takes them a long time to design prototypes in Codesign compared to existing tools, and they had to refer to multiple sources of documentation and information. For the Codesign Marketplace, users mentioned that they want to know the context of usage for different marketplace components, when they would use a certain component, what team or product area published that component, and other educational aspects of things. Similarly, they would want to know the properties and behaviors of a component before adding it to the project. And finally, they wanted to know if a component was official or standard and how many people were using it, like a visual indicator of trust. For component publishing, we noticed that users faced difficulties in finding the publish button in Codesign. They couldn't understand how to get to the flow. And after that, they mentioned they wanted quicker ways to publish components. Finally, with version control, whenever a component is updated in Codesign, users don't know what properties are being updated and how that may affect their projects. So from the interviews and the affinity map, we came up with two major categories of personas or user archetypes: component authors who publish components and component utilizers who use these components. And so the component authors include design system designers and contributing designers, and component utilizers include junior and senior level designers, UX engineers, and other types of users like UX researchers, visual designers, and product managers. And as we go on to the next slide, for each of these different personas, we identify the core needs and frustrations and notice similarities between them. So we narrowed down these 5 different personas into 3 based on the similarities and differences. And as we go, we focused on 3 different personas at the end: a junior level designer with a focus in education, component discovery, and the first time user experience; a UX engineer with a focus on code components, dependencies, discovery, and usage of components; and finally, with a contributing designer focusing on component publishing and version control. And from here, we went to ideation.
Great. So, yeah, after doing all of the research in the beginning phase, we wanted to transition into design through this design sprint that kicked off our ideation process. So, there was 3 main goals. So, getting a better understanding of the user journeys for our 3 main users, and then generating ideas to help shape like the design aspects and narrowing down the solution space a little bit, ending up with lo-fi wireframes that we could work from. The process was a remote 3-day design sprint. So we had our co-design team there. So we had designers, researchers, engineers. Yeah, it was really awesome. So the outcome was that we ended up with wireframes to go from, and we narrowed down to 4 specific flows based on the user journey discovery. So getting a little bit more into that, we have the design sprint process. So we start off with a lightning talk, went into journey mapping here. This was kind of all to get on the same page. So like understanding the users, understanding what journey we're looking at, like what are the pain points, what are the flows we're looking at. And then on the second day, we define the process. So looking at those job stories, kind of figuring out what's the most important to focus on, where we have opportunities in the design process to, really improve the flows. And then from there, on the third day, we focused on doing crazy eights, sketching. So from there, we were kind of understanding, defining, and then we split up and did convergent designs separately, came back together and voted on our favorites, and ended up with our top ideas, which turned into wireframes. I just wanted to call out the user journey mapping because this was kind of the base of starting our whole design sprint and getting us on the same page, and was definitely super helpful. So we created a user journey for each of the personas here, looked at what phases they were going through, specific actions, questions they have, looking at the flows involved, and then any pain points. And these really guided our design implications. Later on, we worked on like the job stories and sketches. So the main findings that we ended up with after going through this really awesome design sprint process, there was like 3 things that kept kind of popping up. The first is context. And so with each of these, I'm just going to give a few examples, but there's definitely many examples for each of these things. Yeah, so for context, having like a used in section. So for a specific component, saying this component was used in this project. Having a documentation section, allowing for a predictive search, showing number of uses, just allowing the users to have a little more context in their environment. The next is flexibility. So for example, the ability to publish privately, publish to a team, or publish to the whole marketplace. And then third thing is visibility. So the ability to quickly see component states, see differences when you have a component update, and to be able to see filters through like badges or chips, for different aspects related to these components. When we were closing out the design sprint, this is kind of what we ended up with were, these wireframes here. And so you can kind of see we have like the sketches here. This one specifically is related to like visibility. Having this side view, you're able to see the project still. And then you're also able to see what you want to see here because we have this filtering system. So that's kind of that. Another example of kind of like what we ended up with here in the design sprint. This is from the publishing flow. So this is kind of on the other end, whereas we were just looking at more of like viewing the marketplace. This is publishing a component to the marketplace. So looking at here, flexibility and context. So having the flexibility to publish to different places, accessibility context, adding that in because we found from user research that was a big thing. From here, I know I mentioned that we have 4 major flows. They're kind of broken down here. Overall, they involve starting a project, which is, creating a project from a template, the marketplace, so that involves like the big marketplace view, and the detailed view of a certain asset in the marketplace, and then component updates. So that also involves comparing versions, and then component publishing. So from here, we went into design exploration from those kind of wireframes we were just looking at. So we had 3 phases here. We did wireframing, which we just did 1 round of that. That was focused on higher level flows, just getting the higher level stuff done. We did a design review with the Google Codesign team, and this was like super helpful. They always were able to give us great feedback, and it was great to be able to narrow down kind of a little more in this phase, how the flows would look. The second thing we did was mock-ups. So we had 3 rounds of mock-ups. We focused on building out all 4 flows in this round versus the first round was kind of more focused on the main flow of the marketplace. Again, we were meeting with the Google stakeholders, and it was definitely really helpful. Then finally, we did the prototypes. So we had 3 rounds of prototypes focused on user testing and getting more detailed in these flows as we move on to prototypes. And these we tested with users inside and outside of Google. Looking at wireframes, our goal with our wireframe creation was to work on higher level functionality. The focus was on the second flow, which is the marketplace. It was kind of, this is like a big part of the process. And looking at like search and filtering, especially. So here's just an example of one of the wireframes we had showing the overlay view that could be possible versus the modal case that is in the as-is version. And then filtering mechanics based on attributes versus we had a couple of other ways to filter them when we were going through design ideations. Here is just like some of our wireframes that we went through during this session. So you can see like entry points to the marketplace. We had a few different ideas for that, different ideas for the look of the cards and what would be surfaced on the cards. And then different ideas for maybe viewing and interaction mode here, for like the asset detail view. So yeah, a lot of exploration went on there. And then for mockups, our main goal was to work on consistency, integration between flows, and got a little bit more detailed. So in this round, we focused on building out all the flows, and the mockup round was like a lot longer. So we met like 3 weeks in a row. So this was where a big chunk of our work was done. So for example, we have the publish flow, and you can see the as is here versus our mockup. So in this one, we were doing a side view versus the modal to keep it consistent with the marketplace view that we were working on at the time, and then viewing the component preview here, and then again, adding in accessibility. And you can already see from the wireframe from the design sprint to here how much things have kind of changed. From here, you can see some of the mock-ups that we were working on. So we were looking at the right way to display like component updates, the right way to notify users on how to discover components, ways to display. We even had a way to like display code differences, looking at the cards, how to display badges, and how to display project templates. And there's a lot here, but yeah. Finally, getting into prototypes, the goal was to test predictability, consistency, and ease of use. We focused on all flows, but we're looking very detailed in this phase. So for example, looking at predictive search, we were getting pretty detailed here in the different methods for that, and those were the kind of things we were testing.
Cool. So jumping into evaluation, we did 2 rounds of evaluation. The first round was a task-based user testing with 7 students, and then an in-class focus group with 8 students in Cary. We made design changes after this and did another round of task-based user testing with 4 students and a UX researcher at Google. So in the next slide, we have, for each of these flows, we want to understand how effective the prototype demonstrated aspects of resource discoverability, predictability with existing design tools, information needs, and ease of use. So we'll go with these one by one. So let's start with the project templates. So initially, we designed a dedicated set. Oh, next slide. Yeah, initially we designed a dedicated section called a template gallery that would help users find these templates. And in the next slide, while we followed patterns of existing Google Workspace products, through user feedback, we got to know that most users couldn't find the template gallery. And in the next slide, we kind of redesigned that experience as a modal experience that reduces the amount of time for users to discover these templates. Then, with the Codesign Marketplace, next slide, initially we designed a label that tells users to search for components, and that will lead them to the entry point to the marketplace. But similarly, in the next slide, yeah, when a user views details about a certain component, he or she can add only that specific component into their project. And in the next slide, after we got feedback from users, we noticed that users could only search for components, but not discover or view all marketplace components. That is, the marketplace helped them only if they had like an intent to search for something. So in the next slide, we changed the label at the bottom to a button that opens the entire component marketplace. Next slide. Yeah, so that's the entire marketplace. And in the next slide, we changed the detail view from a side sheet to a modal with an emphasis on selecting and adding multiple components instead of adding components one by one. So in the next slide, we have component publishing, where initially we allowed users to publish components across all of their different teams. And next slide. But after we got feedback, we redesigned the model to allow users to select teams that they want to publish the components to, like specific teams, even multiple teams. And with component updates, next slide, initially users can select and update components one by one. And next slide, after getting user feedback, we realized that the experience didn't offer a ton of information for users to make a decision to update their components. And let's move to the next slide. So we redesigned the model to allow users to select and update all of the different components and get more information about these updates. And heading on into the final prototype, let's go through these flows. Next slide. Can you open it up in full screen? Cool. So as a new user, I want to know what's inside a template, and I can click on that. So inside Codesign, I click on Discover More Components. I view the marketplace, and I can add multiple components to my project. Or I can search for a specific component if I know what it's called. So here I'm searching for card, and once I search for card, I can click on visibility, different filters, owners, and then I can filter by an owner. I can click on badges. So I know what badges I can filter by, and I can filter by team if I know the specific team. So here I'm clicking Cloud Platform, clicking on the card, getting to know all the details inside it, seeing the different states of the card, and then adding it to my project. So clicking on Select, and then Add Selected. And then I drag it to my board. And the next flow that we're looking at is publishing. So I'm dragging in like a text primitive, and I'm changing the text. I'm adding in a button primitive, changing the button label, grouping them together, making a component. And after I make a component, I'm publishing it to the marketplace. So I'm typing in the title, the tags, the description, documentation link, and I'm choosing a specific team that I want to publish that component to. So I'm clicking on Cloud Run, I'm hitting publish. So it's published. And next with component updates, I noticed that I've got updates for multiple components. I click on view, and then I can update all of my components. So that's what I'm doing now. And I noticed that it's messed up my project, but I want to update like one component at a time. So I click on undo, click on the component, view the different information that's being shown, what changes. I can toggle between the versions to understand the major differences, and then I can update that specific component. So, that's it with the third flow. So that leads us to kind of the end of the presentation, where I want to talk about the future work. We designed the entire experience around components, but this would expand for design themes, icon sets, and data sets. And research pointed out that component authors want to know usage details of their components, and we should be designing or providing them with an analytics dashboard for that. The third is allowing users to add component groups or favorite components. And finally, indicating version differences in the asset detail view. And then moving on to reflections.
Yeah, so it was definitely an awesome experience working with our users and the co-design team. We've definitely learned a lot this semester, so it's really been a great experience working on the design patterns for search and filtering, going through the remote design sprint process, and then working on like the integration between all these 4 different flows. It's been really rewarding, and also it's been interesting working with a product that we weren't able to fully access, so that's an interesting challenge to work with.
Yeah. So for me, I'm extremely grateful to work with the Codesign team on this project, because I've heard of this project like a year ago when I looked it up on Twitter, but I never thought that I would have like an actual experience to work on this project. So thank you for that. The second is designing a design tool within another design tool. Sounds kind of meta, but it was an interesting experience, right? To like understand what interactions are possible within Codesign and how we can fit those into Figma. The third is accounting for scalability and edge cases, especially looking at like search results, how we can filter things, and search predictions and search suggestions. So after that, I'd like to thank the co-design team, Kriti, Richard, Robert, Tim, Lydia, and everyone else who helped us along the way. Thank you so much.
Great job, y'all. I want to see if Kriti or any of the rest of the team have questions or thoughts for Shelby and Guru.
This is Tim from the Codesign team. It's just great work, guys. It was great to see it all come together.
Thanks, Tim.
I would have a question. Which part of the process was the one that you liked most?
Like the most? That's a pretty good question. I'd say the design sprint, and I think Shelby feels the same way too, because that was the first time we experienced having like an actual design sprint, and it was remote. So just learning about it and conducting it, that was an amazing experience.
Yeah, I would definitely have to say the same. The design sprint and like being able to work like with our team at Google, who's like so experienced doing stuff like that, and it was a challenge, and some things we made it work, but it was really, really cool. It was awesome, and then my second favorite thing was like getting to test the final prototypes, and they were like super clean. I was like, oh, we've made it. So yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Lucas.
Thank you.